How's it going? Welcome to another epic episode of Falcor's Mighty Adventures. I didn't upload anything yesterday because 2 days ago at night I did something really foolish. I ate 5 tacos and then I went to sleep immediately because I just couldn't help myself. You know, any normal person would have been like, eat 2 tacos or eat 3, but not me. I said, no, I'm going to eat all 5 tacos. And these were full, big tacos, you know, they weren't like bread with the cheese. It was bread with cheese and avocado and all kinds of stuff, chicken. And I ate them all, and they were delicious. And then at 3 a.m. I wake up to this blinding pain in my chest. And I'm sure some of you know what this is. It's heartburn. Which for all my my friends who are not completely fluent in the language of freedom, heartburn has nothing to do with your heart. It's just basically acid going up in your esophagus and burning, like burning the walls of the esophagus, and it's really painful. Many people like suffer from this chronically, but this happens to me sometimes when I eat, you know, certain foods before I go to bed. So anyway, I couldn't sleep, and I felt this heartburn the whole, like, for hours. So I just woke up, and until like 5 or 6 in the morning I just watched YouTube videos, seated, you know, like this, sitting, so that the acid would go down, and I drank some tea and it went away after a while. So problem is that I woke up and I was absolutely exhausted, and I have to wake up because I have to take medicine in the morning, and I have to eat before I take that medicine. Otherwise it's way too heavy on the stomach. You know, you can get ulcers if you don't eat something. So so what happened was I was tired the whole day. My head kind of hurt because I slept on the chair. Not this chair, on another chair that has a sort of like a neck, no, not a neck, a headrest. It's the one behind me. It's a rocking chair. I slept on that, and I think that kind of screwed me up. So I had a headache. You know, I wasn't feeling, you know, with any energy. So I was like, I'm gonna take a break and not do anything. So I did, and I feel way better now. So also my throat's better. I've been eating. I stopped taking the antibiotic candies, and I'm only eating the honey ones. It doesn't hurt, but I still feel like there's something there, you know. Still way better than yesterday, that's for sure. So today I'm going to talk about, you know, a little bit about how we progressed, like the next few weeks, because some things happened, and I also want to talk about mentally what you have to face in a situation like this. And the mental struggle actually evolves, and it depends completely on how you've been doing until now. So what I mean is, if you start off really afraid, that's what I'm guessing happened, but if you start off really afraid and it's hard for you to relax because this situation just psychologically sort of breaks you completely, then it's gonna be really hard to realign yourself mentally and like sort of change your perspective mentally on the situation, and so you're gonna need, I think, psychological support from a professional. That's why they give you the psychologist / psychiatrist. I think it should be 2 different people, but in my case I got one that had both degrees. I didn't even know that was possible. So yeah, and I would say, don't judge people by how they're taking this. It's very easy to say, oh, you know, like, I always thought you were, you know, a brave person, but you're faced with this situation and you're like such a weakling. There's no one can say anything about something like this unless they faced it themselves. Now, it doesn't have to be leukemia, but I'm talking about facing mortality, facing the fact that you're not immortal, facing the fact that you could die. What's going to happen afterwards? Some people never think about that. I know people that don't like thinking about what happens after death because it freaks them out. I know people that are old that don't want to talk about heaven because it freaks them out. You know, when you're faced with mortality, one way or another, you're faced with something that no one else can relate to unless they faced it too. I'll give you an example. This happened months later, but basically this is what happened. I was going to the hospital to do some tests. I think it was just a blood test, or maybe even a bone marrow test. They had to extract bone marrow from me that day, and we had to wait for the doctors to be ready because, you know, it's a whole process. You know, you got to get everything ready. You have to have a room, a bed ready, and everything like that. So we were waiting with, I'm not going to say who, but it was an older person who came with me to accompany me. And I'm sitting down with my iPad watching Conan the Barbarian, one of my favorite movies. And I'm just there sitting, and then I realized that there's someone, I had headphones on, of course. There was someone looking at me, and when I made eye contact with him, this man was also an older gentleman. This man says, chemotherapy? He just says it like this, and I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I have to do chemotherapy too. And I'm like, when? Because he didn't seem like he had any of the symptoms. And this guy was absolutely terrified. I could see him shaking. Just the thought of, just even saying chemotherapy, I think freaked him out. And he's like, you seem like a strong lad. You seem like someone who can help me with this. And I'm like, well, how could I help you? He's like, well, tell me, like, is it as bad as people say? And I'm like, well, it depends. Like, what kind of treatment do you need? Because, you know, there's different kinds of chemotherapy. And he's like, well, they found some things in my lungs, and they're gonna have to, like, first take them out with surgery, and then they said I'm gonna have to do chemo to, like, kill off any cells that remain that are malignant or anything like that. And I told him, I'm like, I'm no doctor, but from what I'm hearing, most of the damage is removed with the surgery, because, you know, it's something specific. It's, you just, you know, cut that thing out, and the rest is just sort of it's like a backup. You know, you do chemo maybe as a backup to sort of kill off anything that's left, but it's not like chemo is the main weapon against, you know, whatever you have. So that's a good thing. And he's like, yeah, but, like, what about throwing up and things like that? And I'm like, well, I mean, they have drugs for everything nowadays. And I explained to him that, like, first of all, you know, most people, they hear about chemo from movies, and they see, and movies don't sell a happy chemo. They never do. In fact, now when I watch movies where there's a cancer treatment and things like that, sometimes they get it completely wrong. Like, they come up with machinery and techniques that are actually completely false. Like, for example, let's say you have, you know, the person has radiation treatment, and they put them into a CAT scan machine, you know, and you're like, that's not a radiation treatment, you know. I know, I recognize the machine. That's not it. And then you see the person screaming, and like, oh my God, the pain, and you don't feel any pain. Even if, first of all, CAT scan, MRI, all that, you don't feel anything. And even in the radiation treatment, you don't feel anything in the moment. You don't feel anything. You don't feel any pain. So all of that is fake. That's just to sell. So I told him this. I'm like, you know, that is all fake. And also, technology, especially medical technology, has advanced and made huge strides. Huge. So, like, the drugs that we have nowadays are just out of this world. Western medicine is just, I think it's been accelerating in putting out treatment and drugs that, you know, like, we couldn't have even imagined in the past. So I told him, I'm like, If you feel nauseous, there's like a million things they can give you. If you feel any pain or fatigue, there's things you can do. If fatigue is the only thing you feel, which sometimes it really is, there's nothing else. If it's just fatigue, you just sleep. And if you have problems sleeping, then they can give you something for that too. And you could see this guy calm down and relax. And he shook my hand. You know when people shake your hand in a way that you know they're like super thankful. And the guy kind of cried. He's like, you know when old people like close their mouth like this, like, you know, like this. He was kind of crying and things like that. He's like, you made me feel way better. And he's like, I hope I'm as strong as you and things like that. And I'm like, I told him what I always tell everyone, like, all you have to do is be brave. And it was such a beautiful moment. And now guess what happened? The guy that was accompanying me, who's also an elderly gentleman, he says, he looks at the guy, because I had to go to the doctor, you know, by then they had announced, you know, like, Mr. Farkas, it's time for you to go to so-and-so room. And as we're getting up, my companion was like, looks at the old guy, and he's like, you know, how can you be so afraid of death at your age? And I'm just looking shocked. I'm like, what are you doing? And the old man's like, excuse me? And he's like, yeah, how can you? You know, this is a disgrace. Do you have no pride? How dare you, you know, show such weakness and things like that? And I'm just there like, Jesus Christ, you've just undone everything that conversation helped with. You just proof it's gone. Like, that guy's confidence is now, you know, completely shattered. And I was just, I didn't even go up to the guy and I didn't even say anything. I'm just looking at him like, just, you know, ignore it. Like, who cares? But this is what I'm talking about. Some people, they don't know what it's like. They make speculations. They choose to, you know, they have their own opinions on how things should be, but they've never faced something like this. So I'd say don't judge people by how they react. Sure, it talks a little bit about their character, absolutely, but don't judge them. Okay, they're going through something that hopefully most people don't have to go through. So, you know, there are different profiles, there are different ways of how you respond to these things, and it has to do with your personality, yes, but I wouldn't base their entire personality on how they respond to death, you know. Also, another thing to consider is that there's an evolution, right? Like how you mentally struggle against the situation, but the evolution isn't just mental, it's physical. So, you know, at first maybe you're really, really strong, and this happened to me. Like, at first I was like, ha, I can take this no matter what. But by the end of the treatment, I was on my last legs. Like, basically, you've got like a tank. I imagine it like this, like a tank of gasoline, right? And at first it's full, because, you know, you're feeling strong, and like, you know, you haven't been through this too long, and the treatment hasn't really affected you or anything. And luckily, you know, you've got breaks in between that sort of fill the tank almost completely, I'd say. But if the treatment is really strong and you've been there for like a month, that tank, it sort of refills slower and slower. So by the end of the treatment, I was running on empty, on fumes that were recharging really, really slowly. So that's the physical part, that's how I felt it. And the spiritual part is, in my opinion, it's probably the thing that lasts the longest. You will never be the same spiritually. That's just a fact. You can recover mentally. I think I'm recovering pretty well mentally. These videos are really helping me. You can recover physically completely. Some people don't, some people do, but that really depends on, like, that's just destiny, I guess, like how your body responds and regenerates. But spiritually, I wouldn't say you don't recover, I would say you're changed forever. And the spiritual part is is how you see the universe after something like this. Like if this is, if you know, maybe it's the pain that you had to go through and you never really forget the pain, or maybe it's oh nice, maybe it's not the pain, maybe it's the fact that this is really good too. Maybe it's not the pain, maybe it's your relationship with God or religion or your gods. Some people lose faith. In fact, the older gentleman I talked to in the hospital, he's an example of someone who says he completely lost faith in God. He even said, like, do you think there's a God? And I'm like, yeah, actually I do. And then he's like, are you sure? Because I don't think so anymore, and I used to be a full-blown Catholic. And I'm like, well, if you make the calculations, there's actually more reason to believe in a God than less. Even in my opinion, even in a physical, like sort of, not just metaphysical, but physical standpoint, there seems to be more. This, I don't know if I can kill this thing. I will go back and kill it later. Even in metaphysical point of view and physical, I think there's more evidence of a God than there isn't. I told him this, and he was just like, yeah, but what about death? Why would this happen to me? And I'm like, well, that's completely different. That doesn't have to do with God. And, you know, like, I don't think God goes around giving people cancer. Or maybe he does, I don't know, but like that's not a reason to completely abandon that thought. Like, that's just one factor about the universe, that people die, you know. There's just one element. There are many other elements that I don't know if you can describe, explain without the presence of some kind of creator entity, or what the philosophers would call the first machine, I think it's called, or the first push, you know, the trigger that started everything. So yeah, you know, like, that's just my opinion. We talked about this a little bit, but I don't think that really helped him. I really think he completely gave up on God that day, or with that situation. But he did feel a little bit better after the talk, so I feel like I did what I could. So yeah, that's a spiritual thing. You're never the same after that. And it's not something bad, to be honest. I think it sort of enriches your spiritual life. I feel much more spiritually aware of things. I pay more attention to sort of, you know, the role of everything in your life, priorities. I think, for example, I wouldn't say like respect is a word, but maybe appreciation of things like family. That's a spiritual thing, in my opinion. It's not so much mental or physical. It's more like, you know, you spiritually are aware of how important they are to you, and you don't take them for granted like I used to in the past. I'm never going to take my family for granted ever again. Not just because of how they supported me, but because I'm now aware of mortality, and I know just how fragile human beings can be. They're not fragile completely. I'm saying they can be very fragile. Big difference. Humans, in fact, I think are extremely resilient creatures. And people don't give them credit for that. Human beings, you know, they always say like, oh, I lost faith in humanity and things like that. Yeah, there are many reasons to lose faith in humanity. Sometimes the reasons are actually things like this, like, for example, you know, leukemia and diseases, and that makes you lose faith in humanity too, because you're like, maybe something that we did is causing all of this. Like, it's all the things in the air and things like that. That's what's causing it. And you could be right, but I'd say there's way more reasons to love humanity than to hate it. I'd say you could find 100 reasons to love them for every reason you hate them. And but anyway, that's the spiritual side of how you of how I think what happens to you. So physically, you start to notice a deterioration, and you can fill up the tank again. with rest and spending time with your loved ones, and spending time outside, breathing fresh air, things like that, and mentally, it really depends on your profile, and some people need support. Personally, I didn't need too much support from the psychologist, which was really nice. I think that's good. But she did always check in once a week. Are you doing any news? Sometimes I wouldn't be in a mood to talk because I'd be in maybe a lot of pain or really tired, especially by the end of the treatment. But I'm not going to jump to that yet. And there was one, so just continuing with the story, because I think it ties in with this. There, after around 3 weeks of this, of the chemo 6 times a week and all that, it became routine, really. It was basically every day was the same. And I was handling it pretty well. I hadn't lost my hair yet, although my girlfriend had cut the hair, shaved my head completely. I didn't have really any symptoms. What I did notice is that, like, hair on my body stopped growing. So, like, although we shaved my head, and you know how people who shave their heads tend to have, like, it seems like their hair is growing really fast. That wasn't happening. Like, I think the hair follicles just stopped working, and I didn't lose the hair, but it stopped growing. Many people ask about that, like, when did you start losing your hair? At first, it just stopped growing, and 3 weeks passed, right? And the doctors were like, okay, we have to do another bone marrow extraction, and we have to see how effective the treatment was. And depending on the effectiveness, depending on what percentage of the bone marrow is still infected, we're going to see if it's a high risk situation, which means that regardless of whether it's chronic or acute leukemia, if it's high risk, it means that it's an aggressive strand that is going to be hard to take care of, hard to kill. And if it's a low risk one, then in fact my treatment would pretty much be over, like maybe in a month or two. That would have been like the ultimate win, because that means that I wouldn't even need a bone marrow transplant. I could just do treatment with chemo, do some tests, over the next few months, and if it never came back, it never came back. That's a low risk acute leukemia. And I admit this was the one point in the entire maybe one of the only times in the entire process that I got my hopes up, because I'm like, man, if that happened, then we frickin' dodged a bullet there. Because then it's just something like any disease, it's just stabby in the veins, and then 2 months later you're like, okay, you're free, get out of here. But okay, so we get the results, and like the whole hematologist team comes in, and they're like, hey buddy. And I'm like, oh no, I can tell something's wrong. And they're like, yeah, well, we've got good news and bad news, buddy. And I'm like, well, okay, give me the bad news first. And they're like, okay, we're going to give you the good news. Good news is the treatment's working. The number of cells the percentage of cells in your bone marrow have lowered. And I'm like, gee, that's good. And they're like, the bad news is they haven't lowered enough, so you've got high risk leukemia. And I'm like, God damn it, why? And they're like, yeah, I'm really, really sorry. And I'm like, what percentages they are? Like, tell me the numbers. Like, by how far did I miss the target? And they're like, pretty far. And I'm like, come on, just tell me, okay? And they're like, okay, we'll tell you. You came in with above 90% infection of your bone marrow. You came in with above 90%. And I'm like, okay. And how much percentage does it have to be for me to have low risk? And they're like, below 50. And I'm like, how much do I have? And they're like, above 50. And I'm like, but how, by how much? And they're like, well, kind of way above 50. And I'm like, can someone please put this idiot out of their misery, please, and just tell me, like, what the hell? And they're like, okay, you've got like between 80 and 90%. And I'm like, oh, well, okay, I guess that's fair. That's pretty much high risk. And they're like, yeah, so this means that a couple of things need to be done. First of all, this is going to take a little longer than we expected, the treatment in general. And second of all, you're going to have to get a bone marrow transplant, and that's a whole process that we need to take care of. So we're going to need to test everyone in your family if they're compatible, and we're also going to need to start a worldwide search, because there's an organization for bone marrow transplants, worldwide search for anyone compatible. And they're like, since you're European looking and you seem to have European features, I guarantee this is going to be the easiest part of the process. Because you see, there are many Europeans in the world, and those Europeans are very, very conscious about these health things. So we shouldn't have any problem finding someone who's genetically practically the same as you, because that's the thing, they have to find someone who's genetically practically identical to me. Now we have to find someone like that, and you know, you're probably like part German, part Hungarian, part Argentine. Argentines are descendants of immigrants mostly, so you should be fine. Well, I'm not going to jump the gun, but it wasn't that easy. It wasn't that easy at all. But I'll let you be the judge of that when we get to that part. So they're like, we're really sorry that you have to go through this, but yeah, we're going to have to up the drugs a little bit, and this is going to take a little longer. And until we lower the percentage to 0 or close to 0 being 0.0 something, 1 maybe, we can't stop doing this chemo, because this thing's going to explode if we leave anything, any trace. It's going to just come back. So actually, I'm going to end the episode here. Look, it's perfect. I didn't explore any of this. I'm going to do this next episode. We got one blue. Let me see. This, which is pretty cool, but I prefer Soul Feast. You know, there's one thing we can do. Well, we're still waiting. We're gonna go to Helos, and we're gonna pick up the shield that I had. I think I'm ready to wear it. So yeah, that's the story. That's basically how you face it mentally, spiritually, and physically. I'm gonna touch on the subject a little more as we face different hurdles, but yeah, that's sort of a summary of how you face it. And you know, everyone faces it differently. That's why the support system you have is very important, to keep you sort of aware of what's going on, you know, and to fill the tank physically, and to spiritually be there for you so you don't lose it, and mentally be there so you really don't lose it. So with that, we're just gonna change this shield and see if it's better. Oh no, definitely not good. We're gonna see what we do with that. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it, and tomorrow I should upload another one. Thanks, bye.